I'm gonna start my speech in three, two, one. Killing animal is immoral. This is the biggest case coming from opening government, right? We think that this idea is one basically principally problematic, right? Because one, we think that opening government need to also argue why other type of killing is also immoral. For example, we also have certain practices like population control, pest removal, where we also use animal killing for certain researches, right? We think that opening government has the big burden to also to differentiate why then the other type of killing is actually moral enough for them to still actually contain, and why then meat production is not, right? We think that this has never been answered under opening government. So we think that the second point, second biggest problem from opening government is that opening government really trying to debate as if the motion was this house would ban animal killing as a whole, which is not, right? So in my speech, I'm going to prove you three things. One, that meat production and consumption is not necessarily only about killing animal, but there is so much more. Second, on how banning meat production and consumption is actually going to bring more risk for the health and safety of human being. Third of all, I'm going to prove to you on how meat production in the future are going to be better if you do not ban this kind of industry to begin with. But several framework before moving on to my substantive, right? One, we want to also give time to this kind of meat industry to push themselves for a more humane and sustainable animal farming. I'm going to explain later why it will work. Second, we're also going to actually gradually imposing sky high environmentally, sky high tax for environmentally bad or inhuman practices of this kind of animal farming at the end of the day, right? We think that this is necessary for us to push them to actually become more sustainable. Future rebuttal are going to be integrated in my speech, right? First, let's talk about how meat production and consumption is not only about killing, but it's more of a necessity, right? We think that meat has been within human diet for so many centuries, right? We're called hunter-gatherer for a reason. We think that meat production is a necessity for human to survive, both nutritionally and also principally, right? We think that opening government argumentation about alternative exists doesn't really make sense because it exists, but it's called alternative for a reason, right? We think that nutritionally this kind of meat is actually necessary for human to actually survive because the protein contained within meat is actually something that you cannot find in any other produce, right? We think that alternative doesn't necessarily means that it's going to replace it. The alternative means that you're trying to fill the gap that you actually need. That proves to you on how meat is actually necessary for human to survive. Sure, we are going to take the bullet and we understand that there exists an inhuman production of, for example, like cram farm or vertical farming and etc. And we don't necessarily going to condone this kind of practices. We regret this kind of practices. We want to push meat production to become more of a necessity based industry rather than luxury based industry. For example, we're going to put more taxes. We're going to put even fine for production of for produce like foie gras that are torturing animal and etc. Right? We don't condone animal torture. We only condone meat production that is human. That leads me to my second point on how banning is not the solution. Right? Jennifer, opening government talks about risk that this kind of meat production has on environment and also on the people, right? For example, opening government talk about environmental damage or obesity, etc. We think that when you ban something, it has to do with the harm that exists. Opening government bring two harm: environmental harm and also human harm, right? First, let's talk about environment harm. It's going to engage directly to opening government case. First, we think that there's other solution than banning this kind of meat industry to begin with. We can put taxes on fine for industry that do not match up with the standard that we actually have, right? Opening government talk about how companies so profit oriented and therefore regulation won't work. This doesn't make sense. Why? Because the fact that they're profit oriented mean any kind of slash to their profit are going to be seen as something very bad and going to be avoided at all costs. This means that the moment we put tax and fine for this kind of company, we're going to make sure that they understand that what they're doing is wrong and they're going to change it slowly. Therefore, in my setup, I'm going to give them time and pushes for them to actually change their practices, right? Second, we think that environmental damage are going to be lessened in the future. Why? Because there currently has been a growing demand for green farming. Grass-fed meat, for example, is a much more demanded thing right now than for the last 10 years, for example, right? We think that these two things are going to prove to you that environmental damage, sure, currently exists but can be solved not by actually banning but by other type of method, right? Which lead me to my second point about human health. We think that banning poses more risk for human being because like a lot of banning, for example, like drug and etc., it's not necessarily going to be disappeared. Banning thing makes them going to go to the black market, going to make them become very rare. Therefore, you're going to search them from black market, which create black market meat that going to exist only on opening government. Why this happen, right? This happened because of three things. One, we say that the demand are going to go up. Sure, human loves to eat meat, meaning that the moment you ban meat, that doesn't necessarily mean that human are going to stop eating meat. It just means that meat are going to be very illegal and very scarce resources. Means that black market are going to take this kind of chance to actually produce their own meat. This is problematic. Why? Because my second point is about regulation, right? Opening government talk about regulation on how it's inefficient and etc. But we think that under opening government is going to be much worse because regulation will never exist for something that's already been banned. Mean they're going to possess a lot of health risks. For example, it's unhealthy meat, unsanitary meat, and etc. And also it's going to also condone more inhuman treatment because you're now cannot actually farm it on the open. You need to actually cram them inside a basement, for example, to produce meat, which poses more risk. Last but not least is about how it will be better, right? We say that the moment you do not ban this kind of industry, it's going to be regulated and it's going to grow the demand. Regulated mean that you're going to have development in technology, a greener technology. Second, regulation also mean that you're going to easily control this industry. Mass production doesn't necessarily mean that you can hide the production. You're going to be always being seen by the government. And also, the growing demand are going to make sure the price are going to be lower at the end of the day. So I've proven you three things, right? I've proven you one that meat production is not about killing, meaning that opening government cases doesn't work. Second, I already uh, give you the explanation on how banning will possess more risk. And third of all, I already proved to you on how it will become better in the future, meaning that opening government should not win this debate. I'm very proud to oppose. Thank you.